The Mandalorian Season 3, or as I like to call it, the last two episodes of the Book of Boba Fett, and then Season 3. I'm Candler. With me, per usual, is Brian, and with me, not per usual, is Brad, special guest star, and this is Grab the Remote. Coming up, we're talking about Season 3, including the finale and all the good stuff, predictions for Season 4, and the state of Star Wars. Lucasfilms, under the direction of Miss Kathleen Kennedy. We've got a critic versus a defender, and it's going to be so much fun, and we're going to stay friends. We promise. Brian, how are you, sir? Brad, how are you, sir?
Doing well. Thank you.
Same here. Same here.
As always, we haven't discussed anything. We don't really even know each other. And that's, to me, the best part of this, is that we can just have fun riffing. And it's always nice to have people that like Star Wars in the same vicinity chatting about Star Wars.
Sure, it's all love. It's all about the love.
It's all love. So I have to say, Season 3, I enjoyed of The Mandalorian. I will say it was my least favorite season of the three. Would the two of y'all agree with that or disagree?
Go ahead, Brad.
Okay. Yeah, I think if I was ranking them overall, I would say, I don't know if I would view it as my least favorite, but I would say it's kind of the more comfy of the three. I think there's definitely, the first one was kind of all about setting up a general pattern for like how the show works, and the second one really kind of threw in some curveballs, and then this one was kind of getting us settled in a little more with the characters that we've come to know. So I think it's less of a roller coaster overall, I would say, per se. But yeah, I mean, if I was ranking them, it probably would be, I'd probably put 2 as my favorite, and then 1 very closely behind it, and this one very closely behind that.
So a soft third place. I got you.
Yeah.
I feel kind of the same way. I mean, I think we've talked a little bit about how, to me, the last 2 episodes of this season feel a bit rushed because of some of the episodes that maybe feel a little like, maybe not filler, but the side quests take a little bit longer. So I would have liked to have seen what they could have done with less side quest episodes that don't necessarily amount to that much. But I think the ranking is correct. I also feel like that they've set themselves up for an interesting Season 4. And because the characters are all, I mean, you have characters that are loved, in a very short amount of time. We've certainly, they've ingratiated themselves to fandom. And so that's is going to serve them well, as long as they can keep that creative team together.
Yeah, I think that's definitely going to happen. I don't think the Filoni Favreau duo is going anywhere anytime soon. Yeah, for sure.
I don't think so either. I not to belabor this, but I really hate that we had one of the greatest cliffhangers. I think one of the greatest TV cliffhangers in TV history. One of them anyway, with the end of Season 2 with Luke taking Grogu away.
Yeah.
And to have the resolution in another show, I just found infuriating. I wish that had been in the first episode of Season 3. Do you guys agree? Or
I think my take on it, the second that this episode was done, I immediately thought of what was presented at Celebration a couple weeks ago, which is this, and I think everybody kind of knew it was headed this way, that Filoni's going to have his own movie coming soon, right? And it seems to me like the Ahsoka series and Season 4 of Mando are going to basically be setting up the chessboard for the Filoni Fest that will be bringing all of the animation into live action stuff all to a head. And I feel like they needed to kind of clear the board at the end of this season so that they can set everything up going towards that movie for the 4th season. Who knows how many episodes or how many seasons of Mando we're going to have down the line. But that's where I immediately went, was that you can't have Gideon hanging out too much longer because we're bringing Thrawn into the picture so soon, and
Mhm.
there's no way that Thrawn's gonna play second fiddle to Gideon. And so I think that's logically why they did it now. And I also kind of appreciate the fact that they understand that not every season of a TV show needs to end in a cliffhanger. In some ways, it's kind of a surprise to have things wrap up as neatly as they kind of feel, with a moment of peace before who knows what kind of chaos is going to start rearing its head at the beginning of next season. That's where my brain kind of went with it.
Yeah, there was I felt a lot of the episode, the finale was an epilogue, a good 10-minute epilogue where and it was called The Return.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, who is Thrawn going to return? Who's going to return? Of course, we know now it's the Mandalore returned. Yeah. But I kept thinking, are we going to see Thrawn? Are we going to see some setup for Ahsoka? Which kind of brings me to this: if we're going to connect these two series, then maybe we should have had some kind of setup for the Ahsoka series. Maybe.
I just want to see. I just want to see everything from now on. I just want to see underwater the mythosaur just opening its eye and then closing it, and then we just skip to something else. Everything has to do with the mythosaur being waking up, and then I'm not answering your question, but I really feel like I really wanted the mythosaur to do something, but we can't have everything.
We got to get the build up until we see Grogu literally riding the mythosaur at some point in time, because we know that's going to happen.
It has to happen.
That's called the cutest saddle. That's the name of that episode. It's the cutest.
Exactly right. Yeah.
So, Brad, what do you want to see in season 4 of The Mandalorian?
Oh God, man. I don't really know. I like the fact that I can't even necessarily extrapolate and picture too much what's going to happen. I mean, I think it's going to start with more of a bang than this season did, especially with them ending it as serenely and zen-like as they did those last few moments. So I think there's a certain false sense of security where, because we're not going to be angsty in between this season and the next season starting, that I think it's going to come out firing on all cylinders pretty quickly. As far as who's going to be involved with that, I have no idea. My brain can barely wrap itself around the idea that we got Ahsoka coming up in a few months and all that's going to entail. So that's way far down the line. As long as I get a new piece of Grogu armor every a few episodes,
nice,
building up the kit a little bit, I think I'll be good with that.
How do you think that helmet's going to look, Brad?
Are the ears protected or the ears not? Yeah, I don't know. I've seen lots of people do renderings and impressions of that stuff, and it's going to be really hard to not make it hilarious. I think that's the hardest thing, is how do you make it badass and not just adorable / hilarious? How do you split that fine line? And I have no idea. All due respect to the designers who've done all the costume work on this thing so far, that's going to be a super huge challenge.
You're right. Sure. Listen, you're right. The costumes are fantastic. We don't talk about that as much, and I've talked about this at length in terms of just my appreciation for Mandalorian armor. I mean, really, it was just I had the Guide to the Star Wars Universe book, and in that was a definition, and that got me, in 1984, got me excited for all things Mandalorian. I have a quick question for you, just as it popped up. What's your earliest memory of when you started liking Star Wars? What's your favorite film character?
Okay, well, yeah, I'll pop all three of those off really quick. My first experience with Star Wars was my dad took me to New Hope when I was not quite 2. So I was in the theater for that, and then my first memory was probably seeing recorded on VHS when they were playing Empire on ABC or whatever in the mid 80s. I don't remember seeing Empire in theaters, though I did go and see it in theaters then too. I do remember seeing Jedi in theaters, and that's that's still my all-time favorite Star Wars film from a like emotional, sentimental kind of standpoint, just because it was the first one that I remember sitting in the theater with everybody else with Luke in black and everything, the speeder bike chase and that's still the end of Jedi is still my favorite space battle of all time, just because of the chaos of all of it and whatnot. So that's that. Favorite character of all time is and always will be Chewie. Chewie is my favorite fictional character, period. I got like my Chewie watch band.
Nice.
I don't know. And believe me, the irony is not lost on me that this completely average sized, bald white dude who talks and run on sentences adores this super tall, super hairy guy who doesn't like talk at all. But Chewie's always been my favorite because of the loyalty, because of the steadfastness of him, how he can be Buddha in the background 1 minute and then wreck Poodoo the next minute. So yeah, that's he's always been my favorite.
That's great.
Did I touch all
three? Thank you. I appreciate that. I don't want to put you on the spot. That Peter Mayhew passing was a very sad. Now it's that time where I think we're losing a lot of them, and that was hard because it seemed like he was just a lovely person.
I have a cool Mayhew story if we ever have time at some point in time. Actually,
sweet.
Something down the line if we don't have time for tonight.
My favorite was Luke as a kid, and then at some point I thought Luke was lame when I was a teenager, and then Han Solo became my favorite, but now Luke's my favorite again. And C-3PO. I love C-3PO, but I love all of them. But that's where I am. Empire is what I remember seeing first, and I remember there were older kids that had the Star Wars toys, and they were telling me about them. I really was introduced to the toys first.
Yeah, my across the street neighbors were older and they had toys, and I did see it in the theater. I was little, and then, as you know this, Candler, Alec Guinness, Obi-Wan is my favorite.
Oh yeah.
But it's hard. It changes, but to me, he's the one who brought his abilities as an actor, but he brought such believability to the Force in his speeches, in his dialogue.
When you bring on that classically trained Shakespearean actor, man, it shows up. Yeah, it shows up.
Absolutely. Good. Yeah, I get chill bumps thinking about it. It's been how many times? It's countless times you see it. It never gets old to me.
And then how cool is it that Ewan has done the job that he's done and picking up that mantle and channeling him, and then like reverse aging the performance and like all the work that he's put in towards melding those two versions of the same character together, man. It's so cool.
It's not a job I would have wanted to do, but definitely. Mm-hmm. So the state of Lucasfilm. So we've got, with social media and everything, there's been a lot of hate and people get mean sometimes. So it's not about mean, but I know that one of you is a little more of a defender of Kathleen Kennedy, and one of you is a little more harsh, maybe on her reign.
And then there's you, Candler. We have to put you in this mix.
Okay, put me in the mix. Okay.
What I mean is, this isn't like a. I would say that I'd love to hear what you have to say as well. Like to me, that's interesting. I don't.
I'm happy to. I think The Mandalorian is the best thing to happen to Star Wars since the original trilogy. If you're gonna criticize Kathleen Kennedy for Han Solo or things that you or me wasn't crazy about, like the Solo film, you got to compliment her on Mandalorian because it happened under her reign. That's kind of my. So I try to be consistent about it.
Well, there's something about, I think, the nuance of this, because it's hard to be like, that's what I think a lot of people want, right? It's either over here or over here. For me, sure. Nuance means that you can have many people responsible for success and any perceived failure, right? So I'm Brad, I definitely am not a scapegoat person. That's the worst, right? One person, I've said this a lot, like I don't like that people put Jar Jar as the reason for the Phantom Menace not being exceptional. So there's many names I would say, but this is kind of like us. Let's say it was 1985. Like, can you imagine us getting mad about Caravan of Courage or something that, I mean, like there are things that have not been, that aren't up to snuff. But I think in this regard, it has, I think we all maybe are, and I can be guilty of this. It's like you listen to what you listen to and you take it for what it is. And then you certainly have your opinions of what has been produced. So that's where I fall in terms of looking at what is kind of weirdly happening behind the scenes. And Brad, I'm interested to see what you think about that, because in a lot of ways it seems like there's strife, but then who really cares? Because I don't know. I'm the sequel trilogy is kind of where I start my getting a little crinkled nosed at things that started to happen. So go ahead and kind of tell me where you're coming from. I did want to preface that by saying it's not like she is evil or anything like that. It's just like, because that resume, right? Yeah. She cut her teeth with the best early on, way back, 1941, associate producer with ET. I mean, this is a person who has a legendary career around movies that changed our lives. I respect that.
Yeah, and she was handpicked by George. He was like, "This is the person I want at the helm of things from here on out." Between her and Filoni, it's the two of them that have basically kept the thing going. Both trained straight up, or at least handpicked by George, right? I think for me, it's two things that I think the internet has made extremely easy for us to forget. One is the fact that the internet itself is completely based on negativity and on negative criticism. That is how clicks and likes happen. Clicks and likes don't happen from appreciation. They don't happen from senses of awe and joy and wonder. Subscribes and shares come from people moaning and complaining and getting angry about stuff. That's why rage bait is a thing. It's why fake news is a thing. And Star Wars fandom has been bitten by that bug for a really long time. And anytime that you have anything that's multi-generational like Star Wars is, you constantly have old audience trying to mesh with new audience, and especially with Star Wars, that the vast majority of it is literally its main audience is children first, and then paying a little bit of service to the old heads like us that have been around long enough. You're gonna have conflicts because the old folks want things to stay the same and how they remember them and how they feel them, and the new kids want something that they can latch onto as well that's talking to them directly too. So I think those two things automatically were always going to create strife. And I understand the sports metaphor that Kathleen Kennedy is the head coach, and in sports, if there's an issue, the first thing to do is you fire the head coach. But I also think kudos for all the mistakes that Disney has made, and they've made plenty over the past 10 years, keeping that consistency around and keeping her in charge is going to pays more dividends in the long run than we're even really aware of, because making something like this with as many creatives as you've got to bring in to collaborate to do it requires consistency and requires relationships to be built long-term over time. I think one of the main things that irks me about the flack that Kathleen Kennedy gets is I think a lot of people incorrectly associate her or try to even her up with Kevin Feige and how Marvel worked and works. And it's just not the same thing. Kevin Feige was a writer. He was a creative. Kathleen Kennedy has never been a creative. She is an organizer. She is somebody who develops game plans, is in charge of making sure the money's going in the right way. Kind of more that old school kind of what a Hollywood producer is. More about the money and the flow and making sure things are efficient and being done, in the order that they're planned on doing. She doesn't consider herself the person who is filtering all the ideas through her head like George did. She instead entrusts that filter more to people like Filoni and Favreau, who have a deeper knowledge of the lore and of how Star Wars is kind of supposed to feel. And so I think a lot of the things that get pegged on her are unfair at best and just straight up like just not productive like at worst. I don't think she thought this kind of ire and vitriol was going to come at her when she took the job, but I think she's smart enough and strong enough that she understands that's part of the gig at this point in time. And she just kind of keeps things pushing forward. I also think everybody forgets how complicated of an animal Star Wars is now compared to what it used to be. You just had the movies and you had the books and some comic stuff going on for 20 years. And every bit of that was all rubber stamped by George. Now you've got the kids who grew, this is the most magical thing in the world to me, is the kids who grew up on Star Wars are now making Star Wars. And they are putting their own personal contexts, their own senses of style, the movies that they grew up loving besides Star Wars, the stories they ended up loving besides Star Wars, and they're mashing all that stuff together to make new stuff. And of course, it's not going to feel like the original trilogy because it's not all being filtered through the head of one dude anymore. And I think Kathleen Kennedy gets all the blame for that because she's the head coach in that way. Whoever's in charge next, once she passes that on to somebody else, God forbid, I hope it's not Favreau or Filoni, because they both need to be doing creative stuff and not being this figurehead in charge of it. But I think that's kind of like what it all boils down to is people kind of see her as doing a different job than she actually does. She's the person who's connecting people and being a central point of communication, but she's not an artistic filter. She's letting other people kind of decide all that stuff. Now, when the board steps in and they're worried about losing money, that's why Rise of Skywalker happens the way Rise of Skywalker did, like in my opinion. But yeah, and I think the internet in general forgets that every single person on the planet has their own personal context, that we've all got our own reasons for why we like what we like. And we all tend to talk about, not all of us, but a lot of the internet tends to talk about what our opinions are as if they're objective fact. The stronger I make my statement and the more impenetrable and aggressive I make my opinion sound, I won't get any pushback or I'll scare people off from having a differing opinion of me. And I don't know, what I think is best about Star Wars is this idea that we each connect to it in different ways and it keeps growing and keeps getting bigger and we can pass it on and share it with those that are coming up. The phrase I use all the time when I talk to my students about this stuff is Star Wars is secular modern mythology, right? It was all based in that old mythology, the Joseph Campbell and all that stuff. And if mythology is anything, it is constantly changing. It never stays the same. The stories of the Greek gods have changed thousands of times over the years from what they originally were to what we kind of hear about now. And Star Wars is kind of that same way. The more brains you filter it through and the more eyes that see it add their own spin to stuff, it's going to mold and change over time. And it's the deal you make when you have something that lasts this long that you got to allow it to change in order to keep it in your life and to not just keep rehashing the old stuff that you're originally exposed to, because it's going to have the ups and downs.
Brad,
well
Brad,
said.
Well said, and a lot of great points on that. One thing that really jumps out at me is what you said about the unfair comparison with Kathleen Kennedy and Feige, because Feige's more of a creative and he has more of a say. Well, maybe that's the nail on the head. Maybe Kathleen Kennedy should have been more of the money person, and there should be a Kevin Feige type at the head of Lucasfilm. If there is, I don't know who that is, but there doesn't seem to be since Disney took over Star Wars. Does that make sense?
I think a lot of the inconsistency is less about who's in charge and more about like who they can nail down when. And I think a lot of the big trip up, especially like the most disappointing thing that's happened since Disney bought it for me was Rise of Skywalker. And the only reason the Rise of Skywalker was as bad as it was because the squeakiest wheels in the fandom got all the grease and got all the attention, and the board got super busy or super worried about that, dug their hands in and made sure that there was more fan service than anything else. That's why those two movies between 8 and 9 were totally disconnected and totally didn't like carry one into the other at all. You're retconning in between two separate movies, right? Um, I don't know if having that creative head is in the long run would be beneficial in the way that Marvel would be, just because of the collaboration that's required to make Star Wars. You know, Marvel's got 60 years, hundreds of characters, all the stories that they can pull from. Star Wars just had the movies and the EU books, and they're pulling some from the EU, but you got to make up new stuff. And the only way to make up new stuff in that way is to bring new voices into it. You can't just have one person anymore in charge of that if you're doing more than just a movie every 4 years and a few books here and there. Which
let me ask you about this. You brought up Rise of Skywalker. You're talking a little bit about how the disjointed nature of it, and I feel like from Force Awakens to Last Jedi, it was. I kind of put this in improv context, which is in improv you yes and you accept and build. I felt like that Force Awakens was a improv gift, kind of like here you go, Ryan, and it was a yes but, which is sometimes worse than negating.
Sure.
And so that is where I started. Like, am I going? Oh no! Like, and we can kind of, I don't want to go through every single point because I did like what you said about the Kennedy stuff. I mean, I think it's well taken. I think my issue, of course, is that once the Last Jedi came out, did great business, certainly, but that is when it got, to me, the most weird with fans, critics, fans who have an axe to grind, critics who are under an umbrella. All this weird stuff started happening where it actually turned into something that I thought was just horrible. And as Candler knows, I'm not on really anything. I'm not a social media person, like that kind of stuff. I just stay away from it. But I couldn't even like get away from what it kind of became. Yeah. And then I started kind of breaking down what happened with The Last Jedi in my estimation that says, oh no, there's about 10 or 12 things. And I can kind of talk about with the prequels too, because heck, I was doing a rinky-dink movie review show when the prequels came out, and immediately walking out of Phantom Menace, I was like, oh man, that was not my cup of tea. Mainly, I told my girlfriend, who's the main character? She's like, I don't know. You're the movie critic. I was like, yeah, I don't know. I needed like you talked about. You're talking about Campbell. Let's talk about a traditional hero's journey for the foundation, possibly. So those things kind of point back to Kennedy in those anecdotal terms of who can we point fingers at? Can we point fingers at Ryan? He's clapping back. I hate that term, but those types of things, clapping back at the fans, saying, "Oh, this toxic fandom." And then, of course, with Rise of Skywalker, what you said, which you think is the worst of the three, was the one that actually, yes, everybody just annihilated, but the critics actually stayed with The Last Jedi. So both of those were a mess for the same reasons, but also you have the Colin Trevorrow firing. And to me, what his script would have been, I mean, you already have the title, for Pete's sake. Duel of the Fates was going to be.
It was really cool.
Yeah. And so for me, those types of things, like how the inner workings, like the behind the scenes crapola of Hollywood, right? Mm-hmm. Those types of things I'm very interested in, because you go like, well, what happened that made this product that we love so much turn into what that became? So I'd be interested in as you have given a really, I mean, very valid points. I'm also interested in some of the miscues you think. I feel like the Obi-Wan series had many miscues in terms of just from a writing standpoint. I'd love for you to talk about that. I'm interested to hear what you think about some of the turmoil or perceived turmoil about the new Indiana Jones as well, both kind of under the Kennedy umbrella.
No, I think Brian, your point about yes, but is an extremely salient point. My understanding of the way the sequel trilogy was planned originally was Disney liked this idea, because trying to nail down one director to direct 3 movies in a row is almost impossible thing to do nowadays, and then to schedule everything around that. So they said, all right, we'll just bring in a different director for each of those 3 films, and we'll have one handoff to the next, which is, that's an admirable thing for them to undertake, right? And I think when Kennedy decided to hire Ryan Johnson based off the strength of his previous work and the creativity of his previous work, it feels to me like what I've written in interviews between the two of them separately, that there was very much free license when she brought him in to let him use that voice of his to take where JJ left things off with Force Awakens, and to just kind of go off from there, right? But I can also see why everything about The Last Jedi felt weird. Like, I very specifically remember walking out of The Last Jedi in shock, and I just did not know. I wasn't angry, I wasn't sad, I just didn't know how to feel about it, because it did not feel anything like what I was expecting at all. And if you take the whiplash of Force Awakens, which is just basically a clone of A New Hope, and you do something like Last Jedi, which the entire point of Last Jedi is challenging every single thing that Star Wars fans kind of expect and are looking to be what Star Wars is, quote unquote. Yeah, of course, people had no idea how to take it. Last Jedi is by far my favorite of the new movies. And my ranking of the films overall, it's way up there. It's up there with Empire and with Jedi. And that's mostly for me because the more that I watched it, the more I started to figure out what he was trying to do with it. And it wasn't so much, biting his thumb at old school Star Wars fans, as it was understanding that at some point in time, Star Wars was going to have to branch off from what it was to what it was going to need to become in order for it to stay relevant in pop culture nowadays. And I think his whole idea was Empire. When Empire first came out, there were a bunch of people pissed about Empire too, that they thought Luke was going to do this, and the whole big twist at the end. We look back on it now as being like the single greatest reveal like in film history, but there's tons of newspaper articles where the critics just slammed it and couldn't understand it. Fans were totally up in arms because they thought it was going to go this way or that or whatever, just like we do nowadays. But Last Jedi was very much not necessarily, I don't think he was trying to piss off the fans, because the more that you watch it, the more you understand all the points he was hitting were because of how well he knows Star Wars and how much he appreciates it, is that he was trying to rip the Band-Aid off a little bit to open it up to this new generation of people that were coming in. Because Force Awakens so much felt like old school fan service, because it was so much a rehash of the original film. So he wanted the second movie to be twisty. And I think the fact that it was what it was in being as against the grain as what the first movie and the sequels set it up to be, combined with the fact that it just so happened at that point in time, that's when social media was starting to get very jaded and bitter and angry, and the algorithms were changing to where it wasn't so much about what you clicked on, it was about what you shared and what you commented on. And again, nobody comments on something they're happy with. You only comment to complain and get angry and fight back and forth about stuff. And those two things together are what made it into this giant cultural backlash against it. And why even folks like you, Brian, who don't do the social media thing, couldn't escape it. It all kind of was a perfect storm of when it came out, what it was trying to do. And then the kickback from that was what Disney did in being afraid of losing money and nobody going to see Rise of Skywalker, is that they tried to make it as safe as possible, brought JJ back. Because I think Ryan was supposed to do both of the last 2 movies. Well, the trilogy after that, but he originally was supposed to do The Last Jedi and Episode 9 too. But the blowback from The Last Jedi was what brought JJ back to kind of like try to patch things up again. And yeah, Kathleen, I think, had that faith in Ryan Johnson's kind of smarts and writing skills that's why that offer of him doing his own trilogy came up back then. Who knows? I hope down the line he does get to do at least one more Star Wars film or a TV series or something. If you've seen Knives Out, if you've seen anything else that he's directed, it is blatantly obvious that dude is a genius when it comes to like writing interesting characters and twisting things so that people don't know what's coming. He's really, really good at that. So I'm a Last Jedi stan as far as like the sequels go. I can talk about it like for days, but I totally get your point. It's natural that there was blowback for sure.
Certainly. Well, and Ryan's got a show on Peacock with Natasha Lyonne.
Mhm.
I forgot the name of it. Anyway, for me, The Last Jedi, and again, good points. For me, it goes a little bit like this. Like I was saying, like my 10 points. I didn't like that Luke wasn't able to mourn Han. You know, I missed. I think I've mentioned this many times that I think those three are great. Poe, Finn, Rey. I think Daisy Ridley's phenomenal. I didn't like that she was hyper powered. I didn't especially like that some of the things that needed to be, for me, serious were played for laughs. The Leia stuff, we know the Mary Poppins stuff. That was always an issue for me. The Casino Planet, there are a few things about the Casino Planet bugged me specifically, but we needed the kid to have the broom. And then the one other thing that I think really, oh yeah, Poe just blew up Starkiller Base. For him not to be trusted by Holdo makes, and I love Laura Dern, especially in Mask from 1985, makes those things bothered me to no end because you have the hero, you basically have the new Luke Skywalker who is not being trusted by a character, the Holdo maneuver, 1 in a million, right? Now, so those little pieces, right? And there's a few others too that I don't have to go into. Those things that, and it's a beautiful looking movie. That's another thing. I think sometimes like, oh, he can tell a story. He can point a camera.
Yep.
And then Mark Hamill. Of course, the Mark Hamill. There's like the Mark Hamill at every turn is saying, "This is not." I wish I had a good Mark Hamill impersonation. This is not anything that Luke would ever do, etc. On and on. Candler, tell me what you think about all this.
Well,
because I mean, again, I respect everybody's opinion, of course.
I know that. We know that.
And I love it. Again, you mentioned Return of the Jedi, Brad. I saw that in the theater too, and I was dazzled by everything you talked about too. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Great points on those.
Brian, can you please say dazzled again?
I was dazzled.
I love it. Okay, so
dazzling.
I would go further back. Like if I could go back in time, or if there's something I wish they had done differently, and it can only be one thing, this would be it, because I think it would have changed everything. And that is, I wish they would have gone into the sequel trilogy with this approach. After a generation of peace and prosperity in a galaxy far away, a new threat emerges. Something to that effect. I think with The Force Awakens, even though at first I really liked it, it kills Return of the Jedi, because you're watching Return of the Jedi with the greatest ending of all time. And then you're looking at it and you're like, oh, well, the peace doesn't really happen. And Han Solo is not only going to die, he's going to die by his own kid. I mean, I cannot think of a worse death than being stabbed by your own child. And I hated what they did in Force Awakens, what they did with Carrie Fisher. You watch Carrie Fisher, the late, great Carrie Fisher, in interviews promoting Force Awakens. She is a hilarious, very witty, very smart, a lady that I would like to have a cocktail with and talk to, because she was so funny. And I
saw
wish
her one woman show. I got to see that like a few years before. It was amazing.
Yeah.
She's ridiculous.
Totally. And I wish they could have used that in Leia, but instead we got this, I'm so concerned about my son and you and Snoke, and it was poorly written. She was poorly written. Yeah. And Bradley, I mean, your favorite character being Chewie. I mean, what'd you think about Leia walking by Chewie ignoring him and hugging Rey in Force Awakens.
I mean, that the one saving grace of Rise of Skywalker was Chewie getting the medal. Chewie's the one who gets ignored all the time, right?
True.
I mean, it's just
That's
kind of
true.
like how it goes. Straight up speciesism. It's just like everywhere.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think part of the plan with Last Jedi was to give Carrie Fisher more to work with, and part of the disconnect. I mean, that's not necessarily why Mary Poppins happened, I don't think, but Carrie Fisher's passing, I think, really threw a monkey wrench in how do you write and edit around that when they had shot some of it, but not all of it. And she obviously wasn't there for reshoots and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's tough. It's tough.
I will say, you're right about that. And I think they did the best they could with what they had, certainly. Yeah. We mentioned this a while back, but also I do like how they mine interesting ideas from all over. And we've mentioned like the Praetorian Guards. We got those in Mandalorian, and I love those in The Last Jedi. So there are things. I mean, I just like how they do pick. They're taking cool things that Star Wars is. I mean, that's the one thing. Star Wars is filled with cool items, cool concepts.
Yep.
You talked about the costumes, and boy, they pay homage. You get a little. I don't know what the Babu Frick. I don't know that alien, but like you see all those little Babu Fricks. Directly from Rise of Skywalker, like he's the star of Rise of Skywalker.
Mm-hmm.
And so there
are the scene stealer. Yep.
Right. There are, again, for everything that, it's the stupid joke of like who hates Star Wars the most, Star Wars fans, right? That's come about. But I will say that for all the things that I may gripe about, it is the idea that I'm going to find something, especially in the theater. Because when you go to the theater to see it, I mean, the Holdo maneuver in the theater is totally amazing, right? Can we all agree that how
that was a big screen moment if ever there was one?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. That you needed to see that 4D, right? Mm-hmm. You need to see that on an avatar screen. So those types of things, I give them full credit for what they do as artists, and I never want to take that away from anyone who is trying, I guess you could say. So then it becomes kind of petty because you do have those people out there who are just, and I think your point is well taken in terms of people who just want to talk about negativity to get clicks. What is happening? How are things falling apart? What is going, all those things are, there's an audience for that, and there always will be. Yep. What is you mentioned Ahsoka. By the way, my 9-year-old daughter's favorite character is Ahsoka. She has like 5, anything that is Ahsoka. We went to Disney and went to Galaxy's Edge, and there was like a plush Ahsoka, and she got that. She loves it so much. We watched the trailer together. She's so psyched. Yeah. So you mentioned Ahsoka. Is there anything else? Because there's obviously been things that are coming. What besides that? What is something that you're interested in or intrigued that's going to be coming?
Well, I've read I'm way behind. I wish I had more time to do more, but I've read 2 of the High Republic books so far, and I'm really intrigued to see where Acolyte goes. I know that Acolyte is supposed to be completely dark. It's like the Breaking Bad of Star Wars, and it's all on the the dark side of things. But that era is going to be really fun. I just want more new is kind of where I'm at this point in time. I want that slate wiped clean. I'm really excited about that Origins of the Force film to really go to the absolute, like, where there's no connection with anything that we have now.
I'm totally with you. I don't know how you feel about that, Candler, but in terms of having everything connect, let's go back 1,000 years. I mean, or go forward 1,000 years. Anything that puts us where we don't feel like they're beholden to canon. And in some ways, right? Like, because there's some things that get dangerously close to canon wrecking, and so I'm all for moving away from it.
Yeah, but it's like anything else, right? You got to have balance, because one of the coolest things about Star Wars is the fact that everything connects. And those of us that have been around and seen all of it, to have those moments of, oh, are they going to hook this person up with that? And then have that realized is super cool. But you also, yeah, you got to have just some totally out there new stuff to get introduced. Otherwise it just gets too, I don't know, it just gets predictable in its forcing connections. Nobody does retconning better than Star Wars does, but you got to have new stuff too. Yeah, for sure.
Chandler?
I still feel like the Ray movie's not going to happen. I may be wrong, but I feel like that they announce films all the time. Lucasfilm. This is not even a criticism, but they'll announce films that never happen or projects. I feel like the Ray thing's not going to happen, but I could be wrong. Brad, do you think it's going to happen?
I think the fact that they brought Daisy out on stage is a lot more than Kathleen Kennedy saying, "Here's the logo for it." Like, we're in the works. Okay. And even she had said in an interview at Celebration, she addressed the Rogue Squadron film, and who knows how much of that is contractual calendar obligations for Patty Jenkins, or it's literally like creative stuff, or Patty Jenkins wanted to direct it but not write it, and they couldn't get the right writers at this point in time. Who knows? Again, the clicks and likes are going to be all about how this was torpedoed because of bad blood and egotism and whatnot. I think a lot of times things don't happen more because of technicalities than they do because of gigantic Hollywood egos, and because of trying to get this person in the same room to shoot whatever they've got to shoot. I mean, hell, that's what's been going on with Mandalorian. The fact that we didn't get to see Pedro's face in the last episode was kind of a bummer for me. I was hoping that he would get a mask off moment in the last episode of this season too. I think it's tough when you've got these actors that Star Wars makes them more famous if they weren't already famous, and then suddenly they're committed to a lot more stuff and you can't get them locked in for as much. I think the Ray film will definitely happen. I would go push towards it definitely happening because of that new generation of kids who are going to grow up loving the sequels, because that was what they were first introduced to, and Ray being that first live action female Jedi, it's a really big deal. My daughter cosplayed her a couple times a few years ago as well. So not just that I hope that it happens, I think it will. I think it's too good of a business decision. But I will say this, if that movie happens, I will be very mad if they don't find a way to fix Finn's character and to bring him back in and to make him more than what he ended up being. It broke my heart what happened to John Boyega over the course of those 3 films, because he was the only OG, like, true Star Wars fan in that cast, lifelong fan, knew his stuff, walked the walk, preached it every time he was interviewed, and to have him be just kind of cast aside and not have anything come of it was just the worst.
And I do think I agree with that. To me, the most intriguing character going into The Force Awakens is the stormtrooper that goes rogue, that has the moment, right? That was totally fascinating to me. So I'm with you on that. And then my joke, of course, was going to be in the opening crawl. The first paragraph is that Finn has told Rey the secret that he was going to tell her when they're falling through the quicksand.
Yeah.
Because that to me is where JJ gets a X mark instead of a check. I give him a D- for that particular scene. I mean, it's not even mystery box JJ. It's like you actually let us. There's a dangling something or other that we didn't get closure on. So we definitely need that. The way we understand that no actor has any, not even Mark Hamill has power. You're right. I mean, he can protest all day long. He's still going to be grumpy and and become one with the Force, right? He has no power. So for me, it's like I understand what the actors have. I hope that Daisy Ridley has an understanding of how this could be a really great way to bolster what she did in the first three. This kind of goes without saying, but that to me is an interesting prospect. I'm not bummed about it, because, like I said, I think she is a engaging actor. She's got like that. It's the it factor, right? Like not everybody has it, but she has that's something. And well cast, of course. And my favorite character in The Force Awakens, I just didn't like that she didn't have to go through any trials and tribulations, really. I think that was a mistake. We needed her to not, she didn't have to get her arm chopped off. She didn't have to, it doesn't have to be a Luke. I'm not anybody who says we have to have the exact same. I don't care about that. But I do want us to worry about our main character. If you're not worried about your main character, then how can I get immersed? So this could be a cool opportunity. I'm all for it. Totally.
When I watch Force Awakens, I still think this. The movie's called Force Awakens. We saw Finn with a lightsaber in all the promos. And when he takes off his helmet and they're doing that flashing, I swear that's the Force calling to him. I still always felt like he was going to become a Jedi.
Yeah.
That's always how I felt.
I mean, the trader scene with the stormtrooper and stuff, it was all there, like early on. Yeah.
And again, it's just, I think, speculation, of course, but it's like, if you are throwing in everything but the kitchen sink, like they're trying to do, right? There's just no time for it. I mean,
not a film, no.
Right. Well, to me, The Rise of Skywalker is one headache after the other. Meaning it's just, your senses are being bombarded with so much crapola that how do you have an opportunity to take a break, take a breath? Even just, hey, listen, even the other stormtroopers that are kind of the refugee stormtroopers, all of that, you can feel how much depth that could have had if they were able to pull it together and not have this switcheroony they had. Because again, the Duel of the Fates script is kind of out there floating here and there, and I think they pulled as much as they could from it. But
somebody made an animation version of it that I've seen floating around. It's so great. It's so cool. Yeah.
So, and if I'm not mistaken, I don't know if you know anything about this, Calendar, if you've heard this. Like, it's basically like the first part of it. Tell me, Brad, if I'm wrong. Like, there's a Tusken Raider who's fighting, and like you realize towards the end, like that is Rey. Like Rey takes off her Tusken Raider helmet and she's in disguise. That's the one little thing I remember that I thought was, well, that's interesting. There's also like executions, like they're doing some executions. Hux is like front and center, executing people with like a thin, like almost like a lightsaber blade. Pretty dark.
Very cool. One of my favorite fan theories that I heard was that Snoke was going to be revealed to be one of the Praetorian Guards from Return of the Jedi, which I thought was a really cool idea.
Yeah.
You mean, wait a minute. You mean, hold on, Callan. You mean leave us? Like, and then
yes, exactly.
The Imperial Guard guys,
and Snoke's under there. But Brad, Brian, and I have said many times during our Mandosodes that the Mandalorian makes the prequels better in a weird way, but also I feel like it kind of makes the sequel trilogy less appealing in a way. And also I'm wondering if in Ahsoka or the Thrawn movie or Mandalorian, do you think we're ever going to get an on-screen kind of explanation on where the heck Snoke comes from?
Oh yeah, I think we're getting there. Because I think there was too much in this season of Mando and the last dipping that toe close to, who are these clones or who's in the vats, and it ended up just being King Narcissist Gideon making copies of himself. But that's clearly, I think it's pretty clearly the next step is you put together Dr. Pershing, breaking the rules, wearing glasses and stuff. I think he's gonna play into down the line where Snoke comes from and what kind of like cocktail created him. Because I mean, let's face it, Snoke was probably the big bad that we suddenly like off all of a sudden right away in the coolest lightsaber like battle ever seen. But still everybody didn't think we got to know him well enough. So it automatically behooves Disney to make sure they fill in those blanks. I think that will totally happen. I think it's just important for us all to remember that it's pretty obvious that Disney has learned some serious lessons in the past 4 or 5 years. Mando is obviously proof of that. Andor, oh my God, Andor is proof that Disney has learned some lessons. Like I could talk about Andor for days. They have figured out not the golden ticket towards making brilliant Star Wars stuff all the time, but they've definitely addressed the problems that have come up so far and are finding ways, especially now that they've turned a profit on their original investment. They're putting more trust into the creatives. And because you got TV now, instead of having to jam everything into 2.5 hours, then you really get this great lore boom that we're getting now, and the pacing that can really let you sink your teeth into the characters and into the story, and to have those moments to breathe that Brian was talking about. Like there's nothing cooler for somebody like me who's, we're old and slowing down anyway, jamming all that in our eyeballs in 2.5 hours just doesn't necessarily cut it anymore unless you've got all the setup ahead of time to make it all make sense. So I'm glad we're around for it.
Star Wars belongs on television, in my personal opinion. That's the best way for it to have success.
Yeah.
It belongs on television in 2023. It wouldn't belong on television in the 90s or before. But now they can do it. Now they can do it.
I remember being so over the moon excited when you first started to hear those rumors about George was going to do a TV series like that and where it was going to go and stuff. And it makes sense that he did not have the tech at the time to turn it around as quick as you need to under the budget that you need to make it work. And it's pretty crazy. I also props to Filoni and Favreau for understanding that I think season 2 went a little too hard on using the volume, and there's a little more stuff visually in season 3 that isn't just we're in a small contained kind of area where they're building up things more to make them feel more tactile. It definitely looks better than the prequels did. But
what do you mean by volume? What do you mean by volume?
So the volume is that big gigantic studio that they shoot Mandalorian in that's got the screens all around it. Yeah.
Gotcha.
It's a weird name, but that's what they call it, is the volume.
Yeah, and you can kind of feel it once you see the space behind the scenes. I feel like I almost can like tell when I'm on Navarro in those in the seasons. I'm like, yeah, I can kind of feel it. I can.
You can feel where the limits of it physically are.
Yes, because you can always feel when you're on a sound stage in some ways. I think we've gotten visually, we are the most savvy generation of viewers, so we can kind of spot things now more easily. So I always am like, well, there's your sound stage. You don't even see that much anymore. I can remember Kingdom of the Crystal Skull I was watching, and I was like, they're supposed to be outside, but they're so clearly in a sound stage.
I completely agree with you on that.
Yeah, exactly. Just remember, monkeys hate Nazis. Okay, that's all you need to know about from the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Yeah. They attacked them. Basically, Fonzie and the monkeys attacked the Nazis.
It's just
Brad, thoughts on? I know it's just a trailer or two, but Indy 5.
No, I'm not as much of an indie guy as you guys are. I did see the trailer once. Thought it was, intriguing and interesting at least, but I didn't. The last Crystal Skull, I think I saw like bits of it, but I didn't see it in the theaters. It's been a long time. I had my own bullwhip when I was in like 3rd or 4th grade, way back in the day. But I'm not the person to necessarily ask too much about indie because I'm not as up on it as y'all are. Sadly,
I think, well, again, fair enough. I think they should have stopped after the trilogy. But it is interesting. We talk a lot about Star Wars. Obviously, Chandler's a Trek guy.
Mm-hmm.
The way they have drawn from the well of these properties, and some of the things that have gone by the wayside throughout the decades that just haven't made it. Like you have so many properties that are popular for the time period, but they don't have the longevity. To me, it's interesting about all the things that have this longevity and are still putting out quality work. I mean, it's unprecedented. I mean, I think the Marvel component, just the superhero genre in general, because of where it came from in the comic books in the 30s and 40s, is unbelievable that we continue to have iterations of, say, Batman. You know, you were talking about mythology earlier. You know, that's also our modern mythology. So that is, to me, astounding. You know, again, that you have probably arguably one of the greatest movie stars of all time, Harrison Ford. Like, how old is he? And he is still doing something that he was doing in his 30s. Like this, it's like the gift that keeps on giving. It's like Sylvester Stallone being Rocky. Like it never ends. I think it's sort of ended now, but like to have 7 movies, and then, you know, it's just like, I love that we have been able, there's been so many wonderful properties. And of course, Star Wars being, to me, the greatest property. And that's why there's so much passion for it, because it's affected so many people in such a positive way. Ultimately, this is about the feeling you get or got when you first watched it, and how it made you feel, and how you were able to connect with like-minded people to talk about it. Back in the day when it was just the neighborhood and the toys and the vehicles, you know, and the waiting. Can you guys remember? I know it's like you said to me, between Empire and Return of the Jedi, that was the longest 3 years of my life.
Oh yeah,
completely.
Thank goodness for the toys. What else were you going to do?
Exactly.
You got to make up the adventures while they're producing.
Well, gentlemen. Oh, go ahead, Brad. I'm sorry.
I was just to say, and then get angry when the movie doesn't do what you were having the characters do in your backyard. You know,
ding, ding, ding. Gentlemen, this has been awesome. Brad, thank you so much for joining us. Everyone, thank you for listening. Like, share, and subscribe.
Great work, Brad. We'd love to have you. Really awesome. Great insight. Really good.
And
love it.
And come back for Ahsoka. I'm Candler. This is Brian and Brad, and you've been watching Grab the Remote. See you later.